Liam had been doing everything right. That was what made it so maddening. He had the cabin. He had the heaters. He had the insulation specs from the manufacturer, the weather stripping kit, the propane backup, and a checklist he had spent 3 weeks building before he ever drove north into Montana. He had done what every modern guide told him to do. He had followed every conventional instruction available to a man who wanted to spend a winter off-grid and stay warm doing it. By the 3rd week of January, he was waking up to visible breath and numb fingers inside a structure that had cost him more than most people spend on a car. He was not doing everything right. He just did not know what he was doing wrong yet. That answer would come from a building that was already old when Liam's parents were born. It would come from a design that the military figured out in 1941, deployed across some of the most brutal environments on the planet, and then quietly forgot to teach anyone about. It would come from a neighbor he almost never knocked on the door to meet, living warm and comfortable in a curved metal hut that looked, from the outside, like something you would store hay in. This is what nobody told you. This is what the modern construction industry had every reason not to tell you. And once you understand it, you will never look at a building the same way again. Liam arrived in Montana in October with what he considered a reasonable setup. The prefab cabin kit had gone up in 2 weeks. The walls were pine. The windows were double-paned. The floor was over a crawl space with insulation bats underneath. It looked exactly like every off-grid cabin you have ever seen photographed in golden hour light, with someone holding a coffee cup on the porch. It was clean. It was modern. It checked every box. What it could not do was keep a man warm. The electric space heater ran all night, and the room still dropped to 41 degrees by morning. The propane backup burned through a full tank in 9 days during a cold snap in early January. He caulked every window frame he could find. He hung thermal curtains. He draped blankets over the door. None of it moved the needle in any meaningful way. The cold was not coming through his windows. It was not coming through his door. It was coming through the walls themselves, through the geometry of the building, through the physics of shape that had never been designed to work in serious cold, only to look good in a catalog photo. He wrote in his journal on January 22nd, spent $180 on propane this week. Still cold. Something is wrong with this design, and I cannot figure out what. He was right. Something was wrong with the design. But the design was not his. The design was the entire modern residential framework he had trusted without questioning it. A quarter-mile east of Liam's property line sat a structure he had dismissed the first time he saw it. It was rounded, corrugated steel, low to ground, long, shaped like the top half of a cylinder that had been pressed gently into the snow. It looked like an old storage unit. It looked like something left over. He had driven past it a dozen times without slowing down. In February, he saw smoke coming from a stovepipe at one end of it. Someone was in there. Someone was warm in there. And the temperature that day was -19. Liam knocked on the heavy wooden door 3 days later. The man who answered was named Gerald, 74 years old, had been living in that Quonset hut for 31 years. He stepped back and let Liam through the door without asking what he wanted. And the warmth that came out of that doorway stopped Liam where he stood. Not the sharp, dry heat of a space heater pointing at your face. Not the temporary warmth of a room that will be cold again in 40 minutes. Something that lived in the space. Something that had settled into the walls and the floor and the curved ceiling and was not going anywhere. The kind of warmth that a building produces when the building itself has learned how to hold heat. Gerald had a cast ironwood stove. He had a concrete floor under old rugs. He had rigid foam board against the interior of the metal shell and reclaimed wood paneling over that. He had roughly 800 square feet of living space and a heating bill that Liam, once he heard the number, could not speak about for several seconds. How do you keep it this warm? Liam asked. I don't really have to try that hard, Gerald said, and handed him a coffee. Here is what nobody told you about the Quonset hut. In 1941, the United States Navy needed a structure that could be shipped anywhere in the world, assembled by soldiers with no construction experience, and then actually function as shelter in conditions that would destroy a conventional building. They needed something that could go up in the Aleutian Islands, where the wind does not stop and the cold does not negotiate. They needed something that could work in the Pacific jungle heat and the North African desert and the frozen airstrips of Alaska. One structure, all conditions. The George A. Fuller Construction Company solved that problem in a matter of months. They called the result the Quonset Hut, named for Quonset Point in Rhode Island, where the first units were built. By the time the war ended, more than 150,000 of them had been manufactured and deployed. They housed soldiers. They functioned as hospitals and mess halls and repair shops and chapels. They kept men alive in environments that were specifically trying to kill them. That engineering did not become obsolete. It became forgotten. Those are very different things. Liam started reading after that first visit. He dug into military engineering documents from the 1940s. He read thermodynamics studies. He read old Army Corps of Engineers field manuals that describe in careful technical language exactly why these structures performed the way they did in cold weather deployments. What he found was not complicated. That was the part that stayed with him. The first thing the arch does is eliminate the corner. Think about every rectangular room you have ever been in. Every corner where a wall meets the ceiling is a structural junction, and a thermal one. Cold air finds seams. Cold air finds corners. A standard rectangular room has 4 wall-to-wall corners at the floor, 4 wall-to-ceiling corners at the top, and additional junction points at every window frame and door frame. Every one of those points is a location where warm interior air and cold exterior air are separated by the thinnest possible barrier, pressing against each other across a seam that was never going to be perfectly sealed. In a cold climate, rectangular geometry is your enemy. You are not living in a room. You are living in a heat-loss machine. The Quonset arch eliminates this entirely. There are no wall-to-ceiling joints because there is no wall and no ceiling. There's only the curve, continuous from one side of the floor to the other. The structural load distributes evenly around that curve, which is why the original military huts could withstand conditions that collapse conventional structures. And the thermal weak points, the seams, the corners, the junction gaps, are not reduced. They are removed. But the arch does something else that almost nobody talks about. Heat rises. You already know that. What you may not have thought about is where it goes after it rises in a rectangular room. It goes to the ceiling. It pools there 8 or 10 or 12 feet above the floor, far above every person in the space, warming the ceiling joists and doing nothing useful for the humans below. The floor stays cold. The lower walls stay cold. The people stay cold. And the heating system runs continuously trying to compensate for a problem that the room shape is creating faster than the heater can fix it. In a curved structure, heat rises and follows the arc. It cannot pool flat against a ceiling because there is no flat ceiling to pool against. The warmth moves up the curve, reaches the peak, and comes back down along the opposite wall. It circulates, not because of a fan or a mechanical system, because of the shape. The Quonset hut created a natural convective loop that distributes heat through the entire space, using nothing but physics. Gerald's stove burned for a few hours in the morning. The room stayed warm all day. Liam's heaters ran all night. The room was cold by morning. This is not a small difference in efficiency. This is a fundamental difference in how a building relates to heat. The second thing Liam came to understand was thermal mass. And this one was harder to accept because it meant the modern construction approach he had trusted was not just imperfect. It was working against him. Modern residential framing is light. Dimensional lumber, insulation bats, vapor barrier, siding. It goes up fast. It costs less per square foot than older construction methods. And in a moderate climate, it is adequate. It keeps a building at a reasonably stable temperature when the outdoor temperature swings 10 or 15 degrees between day and night. In extreme cold, it fails. Not catastrophically, not the way a poorly designed bridge fails. It fails slowly, expensively, through your heating bill and your sleep quality and the constant low-grade discomfort of space that is never quite warm enough. The reason is that light frame construction has almost no thermal mass. Thermal mass is the capacity of a material to absorb heat and store it. Concrete has high thermal mass. Stone has high thermal mass. Brick has high thermal mass. Dimensional lumber and fiberglass insulation have almost none. They warm up fast and they cool down fast, which means the temperature inside a light frame building tracks the temperature outside much more closely than most people realize. When Liam's propane heater cycled off at night, the cabin temperature dropped dramatically within an hour. The heater would then have to run hard for 30 minutes to bring it back up. That's cycling. Heat cool was burning propane, wearing out equipment, and producing a room that never reached a stable, comfortable temperature because the structure itself had no capacity to store the energy being put into it. Gerald had poured a concrete floor in 1998. It was not original to the hut. He had done it himself because he noticed that the floor held warmth in a way that the original metal decking did not. What he was doing, without knowing the technical name for it, was adding thermal mass. The concrete absorbed heat from the stove throughout the day and released it slowly through the night. The floor became a battery. Gerald's stove burned for maybe 6 hours a day total. The floor handled the rest. "I sleep warm," Gerald told Liam during one of his visits. "Have for 30 years. Never once woken up cold in this hut." 30 years. Liam had been in Montana for 4 months and had not slept a full warm night yet. The third thing was wind, and this is the one the industry really does not want you thinking about. Montana winters bring wind, not the inconvenient wind that knocks over your outdoor furniture. Sustained wind at 20, 30, 40 miles an hour across open terrain, for days at a time. Wind is not just uncomfortable. Wind is a heat extraction mechanism. Pressure against a flat wall forces air through every imperfect seal, around window frames, through door gaps, along baseboard edges, through any crack in any surface that faces a weather. This infiltration of cold outside air can account for a massive portion of a building's total heat loss. And in a high wind environment, no amount of caulking fully solves it because the problem is not the seals. The problem is the shape. A flat wall is a sail. It catches wind pressure and holds it, and that pressure finds every weakness. A curved surface is an airfoil. Wind moving across it accelerates and passes around it. The same physics that generates lift on an airplane wing deflects wind around a Quonset hut. Pressure does not build against the surface because the surface does not give it anything to build against. The result is dramatically less infiltration, dramatically less cold air finding its way inside, dramatically less heat being stripped out of the interior. Liam had noticed something wrong on windy nights in his cabin, without being able to name it. A faint whistling from the window frames. A cold that felt different, directional, like it was coming from somewhere specific. He had gone over every inch of the weather stripping and still could not fix it, because the weather stripping was not the problem. The problem was that he had built a box and pointed it into the wind, and expected it to perform like something that had been designed for wind. On a Saturday in late February, Liam helped Gerald split firewood, and the old man talked while they worked. "A lot of the guys who lived in these during the war," Gerald said, sitting around on the block, "came back and bought surplus units, built their own. My uncle had one on his farm in Nebraska when I was a kid. I played in it. Never thought about why it was warm. It just was. He split the round clean. Then I bought mine and started paying attention. Shape matters. Mass matters. But mostly what happened is people forgot to think about a building as something that has to work with the weather. Now they just build boxes and sell you bigger heaters." Liam stacked wood and did not say anything. There was not much to say. By March, Liam had made changes. He was not going to rebuild. He was stubborn and he had invested too much. But he understood the problem now, and understanding the problem was the first thing that had actually helped. He insulated the floor and poured a small concrete pad under the wood stove he installed to replace the propane unit. He added rigid foam insulation to the exterior walls. He planted young spruce on the northwest corner of the property as a windbreak, knowing they would not matter for years, but planting them anyway because he was thinking about the long game now instead of just surviving the next cold snap. His propane bill in March was $40. He slept through the night. He went back to Gerald's hut on a Thursday afternoon when the light was staying longer, the first suggestion that winter had a limit. They sat with coffee. The stove was barely running. The room held its warmth the way a well-made thing holds its quality, without effort, without announcement, without needing to prove anything. These huts were designed in a few months in 1941, Liam said, and they're still working. Gerald nodded. In that same time, We build an entire industry around structures that work worse, that need more energy, that cost more to heat. Progress, Gerald said. Just a word. No irony, no sarcasm, just the flat truth of it sitting there between them. Outside, the wind moved across the rounded roof and kept going. It did not find anything to push against. Inside, the warmth stayed exactly where it had always been, held by a shape that understood something modern construction had stopped teaching. Liam drove home with the window cracked, cold air moving past him, thinking about what it means when a solution works so well that it outlasts the war that created it, the decade that followed, the century of progress that was supposed to replace it. He thought about the men who had lived in those huts on Alaskan airstrips and Pacific atolls, men who had been handed a curved piece of stamped steel and a wooden door and told, "This will keep you alive." And it had, not because of the heater inside it, because of the shape around them. He came home and split firewood until the light was gone. When he came inside, the concrete pad under the stove was warm to the touch from the afternoon fire. He pressed his palm flat against it and held it there, feeling the heat move slowly from the stone into his hand, patient, stored, unhurried. This was the thing they forgot to tell you, not how to make heat. Everyone knows how to make heat. The forgotten part was how to keep it. The forgotten part was never the fire. The forgotten part was the shape of the room that held it.